Well, if you've been watching the show for the past few days, you know that the Pete Hegseth, is he a war criminal, is he not a war criminal story, on the one hand, is the gift that keeps on giving, because there's a lot to discuss, and there's a lot of law and a lot of foreign policy and a lot of good substance, a lot of fun fodder for public commentary. Pete Hegseth also deserves to be robustly defended, and I am very happy to do so on this score. On the other hand, we've been lamenting that this is clearly an op. That is clearly an op, initially ginned up by the Washington Post, which really owes Pete Hegseth, frankly, an apology. The Washington Post clearly owes Pete Hegseth an apology, especially in light of the closed-door congressional testimony that we just got on Thursday. Hold that aside just for the time being. But this really is an op, as we've been explaining. And the op here is ultimately not about Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth has been a pawn in the Democrat media complex attempt to take down the Trump administration. It has been that way literally since the transition period. I remember when Pete Hegseth was first nominated for Secretary of Defense, now he's Secretary of War, way back when, over a year ago now, last November. All the stories came out. This guy's a philanderer. He's a drunkard. He's getting drunk on set on Fox and Friends there. He's got the little flask of whiskey, this gulp. I mean, literally between hits over at Fox News, if you believe the demonic stuff that the corporate media was saying about this guy. He's having affairs. He's a rapist. I mean, it was very much Brett Kavanaugh 2018 Supreme Court nomination information operation all over again. That to me, as a veteran of some of these public fights, of some of these information operations, that's very much what it felt like at the time. So you had that, then you had Signalgate. You had Signalgate then back in March, where admittedly, not the best choice of medium to use Signal to discuss these sorts of things. Back then in March, the controversy was that you had folks like Pete Hegseth, Vice President J.D. Vance, and others who were talking about this then imminent strike against the Houthis in Yemen. Actually, the Pentagon's Inspector General has just come out with a brand new report this past week saying that Hegseth did potentially violate norms and protocol and potentially put in harm's way the troops. We'll see if anything comes of that. I'm not going to brush it under the rug. This was not handled in the best way possible, but certainly they made a much bigger stink of this, is my point, than deserved to be on the merits. The operation, for what it's worth, was totally successful. There were no American servicemen or servicewomen who were compromised or actually put in harm's way or anything like that. Signal is a commercial app. You'd like to think the government has something better than that. It's also a pretty secure app, okay? So let's not get ahead of our skis here as well. So you had that. You had the transition period Kavanaugh-esque smears against Hegseth. You had the Signalgate controversy from March. And now you have this. Now you have this stupid, utterly inane, quote-unquote controversy ginned up by hearsay, by anonymous, nameless sources for the Washington Compost, as Mark Levin calls it. And they had this story about how Pete Hegseth actually issued a war crime, how he called for the murder of all the survivors. Kill them all, he allegedly said, except he actually didn't say that. Except he literally didn't say that. You see, all along this story has only been, even within the context of the chain of command, it's only been partially about Pete Hegseth. The other guy who's been at the center of this faux manufactured controversy is a man by the name of Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley. He goes by Mitch, so Mitch Bradley. He is an admiral in the United States Navy, and he was the one who actually commanded what the White House has corroborated and confirmed is this second follow-up strike on the narco boat, the drug peddling vessel in the Caribbean Sea back on September 2nd. Well, as the case may be, Admiral Bradley actually was on Capitol Hill on Thursday. He was just there this week in a series of closed-door classified briefings so that lawmakers could continue their investigation. And by all accounts, he answered all the questions that the lawmakers had. For instance, here is Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who knows a thing or two about what it is like to act in the heat of the moment and to serve one's country admirably in a theater of war. Here is Senator Tom Cotton talking about what he heard from Navy Admiral Bradley in Congress on Thursday.
I saw two survivors trying to flip a boat loaded with drugs bound for the United States, back over so they could stay in the fight. And potentially, given all the context we heard, of other narco-terrorist boats in the area coming to their aid to recover their cargo and recover those narco-terrorists. And just like you would blow up a boat off of the Somali coast or the Yemeni coast, and you'd come back and strike it again if it still had terrorists and it still had explosives or missiles, Admiral Bradley and Secretary Hegseth did exactly what we would expect them to do. Yes, look, this is not like a firefight in some cave in Afghanistan that had 3 people. This was witnessed by literally hundreds of uniformed and civilian personnel at the Pentagon, at Fort Bragg, at other installations. Dozens of them were lawyers. Everybody was watching. Everybody had seen the intelligence and the legal basis leading up to these strikes. Everyone was present during it, and that continues to be the case. There's been no change in the guidance or the order that the Secretary has given to our troopers. And in subsequent strikes, there is an example where survivors actually were shipwrecked and distressed and not trying to continue on their mission. And they were treated, as they should be, as non-combatants. They were picked up by U.S. forces. Just an example of how, of course, our military always obeys the laws of war. Our military also acts within appropriate lawful authority to target these narco-terrorists.
All right, so Cotton there talking about the chain of command, about how all this was done in a constitutional, in a permissible fashion. Again, Senator Cotton served this country admirably in Iraq 2 decades, give or take ago. He knows a thing or two about serving his country in the chain of command. By the way, part of the controversy, the quote-unquote controversy, has been the entire notion of this follow-up strike. You heard Senator Cotton there try to distinguish between legitimate follow-up strikes and not. I think it's worth noting, as the Washington Post itself, I guess in kind of a weak, limp attempt to try to redeem its credibility on this particular story, in this bizarre attempt, I guess, to try to get their credibility back when it comes to story, they published an opinion piece, an opinion column. And by the way, the op-ed page of the Washington Post is actually heading in a very different direction than the rest of the paper. That's a story for another day. They're making some necessary corrections there to the op-ed page. But hold that aside. They did publish an op-ed on Thursday talking about how the legal predicate for some of these so-called double-tap strikes, 1-2, these back-to-back strikes, goes back to, wait, you guessed it, the Obama administration. Check this out from a Washington Post op-ed this Thursday. "We use double taps all the time," said David Shedd, former deputy director and acting director of the Defense Intelligence Agency in the Obama administration. "You would get the initial signature off of a target that's been hit," he told me in a Pockets interview. "And if you saw that they squirted and were injured, you hit them again. In fact," he said, "there was often a second predator ready to go. That was fully expected to be used if you didn't have a 100% coming out of the first hit, maybe a third hit. This was done routinely. It had bipartisan support." So if you have moral objections to this idea of a follow-up strike, and in case we're burying the lead here, it is worth confirming the following point. Every single strike, there have now been 22 following the most recent narco-terrorist strike that the administration just did on that same day, Thursday, December 4th. Every single strike, the Pentagon is telling us, is on a vessel or on drug peddlers who have been identified as being affiliated with a U.S. State Department recognized foreign terrorist organization, FTO, or a specially designated terrorist group, one of the various nomenclature taxonomical groupings of the U.S. government has there when it pertains to groups of nefarious, imminently threatening foreign terrorists. So that's what's happening here. All these strikes are dealing, whether it's Trendy Arago, whether it's some other sort of narco-terrorist ring here in the Western Hemisphere. Typically, these narco-terrorist rings are done with support, oftentimes from Hezbollah, which as a jihadi organization punches way above its weight class when it comes to influence in the Western Hemisphere. Oftentimes, they are trained from the communist regime in Cuba. They have help from Russia and or China as well. As I said, incidentally, the most recent strike was just on Thursday, so give Secretary Hegseth credit for ignoring the noise and continuing mission-focused on the task ahead. U.S. Southern Command tweeting this out on Thursday, quote, "On December 4th, at the direction of Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, Joint Task Force Southern Spear conducted a lethal kinetic strike on a vessel in international waters operated by a designated terrorist organization. Intelligence confirmed that the vessel was carrying illicit narcotics and transiting along a known narco-trafficking route in the Eastern Pacific. 4 male narco-terrorists aboard the vessel were killed." At a certain point, I fail to understand how someone can really object to this. Like really, how can you actually object to imminent, preemptive, prophylactic action to keep the homeland safe? If you don't think that attempts to smuggle kilos and kilos and tons of cocaine and fentanyl and the worst narcotics known to man, if you don't think that that is chemical warfare, whether it's formally declared or not, is that not chemical warfare declared upon the United States? Is there not a long and illustrious history of the United States doing exactly this, of acting to defend its own people, its own homeland, and its own way of life, especially when it comes to threats within Latin America, within the Western Hemisphere? Oh yeah, there's literally over 2 centuries of precedent for this, going back to the Monroe Doctrine from President James Monroe in the early 19th century, confirmed and expanded by a doctrine known as the Roosevelt Corollary, the Roosevelt there being Teddy Roosevelt, who around the turn of the 20th century expanded upon the Monroe Doctrine and said that the United States is going to preserve its interests in Latin America when it comes to foreign powers meddling here, period, full stop, end of story. How does that not fit like a perfect glove? Like an O.J. Simpson glove, it fits like a T. It exactly describes what is happening right now in the current situation. You have these foreign actors, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's Hezbollah, that are teaming up with these horrific narco drug peddling and smuggling rings there. And the United States is entirely on sound and justified footing when it comes to trying to take prophylactic action here. So I, for one, am deeply heartened when it comes here to what Hegseth is doing and just kind of just going full speed ahead. By the way, just a quick note on this. I'm also heartened by the fact that there is a logical consistency, if I may say this briefly, between what the administration has been doing overseas when it comes to Southern Command and the narco-terrorist drug interdictions, when it comes to that, and a lot of its more high-profile recent domestic agenda as well. So there's been a lot of attention over the past week or so to the latest ICE operation, the latest Tom Homan, Kristi Noem ICE operation, which is now taking place in the broader New Orleans, Louisiana area there. And this follows on a similar ICE operation in Chicago. There was one in Charlotte, North Carolina that got a lot of attention there. The common denominator is this, folks. The common denominator is that this administration, that when it comes to interdicting drug smuggling narco-terrorists in the near abroad, or when it comes to the illegal alien threat home, they are there to protect and defend the American citizen. Period, full stop, end of story. If that is not America first, frankly, then I don't know what is. Meanwhile, a bunch of other legal updates that we have for you that have happened just over the past few days as well. 2 in particular that stand out that I do want to briefly discuss. So the Texas redistricting litigation has now made it to the United States Supreme Court. We knew that was the case because on these special redistricting Voting Rights Act of 1965 types of court cases, there are certain types of rules that apply. For instance, when you get at the district court level, we explained this on a previous episode, at a district court level, you actually get a 3-judge panel for a Voting Rights Act case, which is a real quirk of federal litigation. Typically, you only get 1 judge at the district court level. Your mileage may vary as to whether or not you think that this sort of litigation is justifiably gets this sort of special treatment and dispensation. I kind of think it's a little weird, but it kind of just is what it is. And you're also allowed to expedite an appeal from the district court to the Supreme Court on a slightly different basis, a slightly different time frame there. So the Supreme Court, long story short, gets the Texas redistricting map. So in case you forgot, the Lone Star State passed a new mid-decade map. Somewhat rare. Okay, admittedly somewhat rare, but they did so in direct response to Gavin Newsom and California Democrats saying that they were going to do the exact same thing. That is the key point here. It's not like Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton and the Republican leadership in Austin, Texas. It's not like they said, oh my God, we're going to try and make sure that we secure the House for Republicans in 2026, which, by the way, is totally fair game. You actually can be hyper-partisan when it comes to this. Gerrymandering as a practice goes back literally to, oh yeah, the guy himself, Elbridge Gerry, goes back to the origins of the Republic. But the state of Texas was doing this in response to California. Okay? I mean, there's something rudimentary to the who acted first logic. You know, for every action we know from Isaac Newton, there was an equal and opposite reaction. Okay? So that's very much what happened here. Long story short, the 3-judge panel of the district court, in an utterly egregious decision by a first Trump term judge, Jeffrey Brown, a former conservative justice in the Texas Supreme Court. I have no idea what's happened to Judge Brown. He had an utterly appalling opinion, saying that the Texas map violated the Voting Rights Act. Judge Jerry Smith, who's been on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals for about 4 decades since the height of the Reagan era, had one of the most blistering, vociferous dissents that I've ever seen Judge Smith give. And let me tell you, as a former Fifth Circuit clerk myself, I've seen some pretty fiery Jerry Smith dissents. This one really took the cake. So this gets expedited to SCOTUS, and the Supreme Court just on Thursday in a 6-3 unsigned opinion saying that actually this is totally fine, that the district court has completely overstepped here, and that we are going to enjoin this lower court opinion, which for all intents and purposes, the practical effect of this means that the Texas map is going to hold, because they're going to run out of time to actually get a full appeal on the merits. The Texas primary is in March, okay? The way litigation works, you can only fast-track this stuff so much. The Supreme Court is kind of a slower-moving vehicle at its core. So even though this is not a final ruling on the merits, as lawyers call it, it is just a firm, unequivocal stay of the lower court's rejection of Texas map. The practical effect of this is that this map is going to stay, and that Republicans will have their way when it comes to candidates filing in their districts, something that they have to finalize here in early December. And then by March, we'll have the primary. So it's very good news for Texas, and it's definitely the best possible news that Republicans could have when it comes to their attempts to possibly keep the House come 2026. By the way, I have to say this. I love this line from Sam Alito. Sam Alito, who is quite possibly, in fact, probably is my favorite justice on the United States Supreme Court. He has this just delectable line here, taking a clear jab at Elena Kagan, who dissented along with the other two liberal ladies, Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sotomayor. Alito writes this, quote, "I join the order issued by the court. Texas needs certainty on which map will govern the 2026 midterm elections, so I will not delay the court's order by writing a detailed response to each of the dissent's arguments. Instead, I offer 2 short points, which for me are decisive." That's legalese for saying, what Elena Kagan wrote is really stupid. I'm literally not going to devote any more time than like I absolutely have to respond to this, because it's actually just not worth my time. That's essentially what he's saying there, and that's one of the many reasons, frankly, why I just love Sam Alito. So a big victory for Texas and for Republicans more generally in their attempts to keep the House. One other legal update for you. We finally got the D.C. pipe bomber. My God. What the heck happened for 4 years? Where was the Biden DOJ when it came to the D.C. pipe bomber? So the D.C. pipe bomber, in case you forgot, they found pipe bombs that were planted right outside of the RNC and the DNC the night before J6. So this was on January 5th, 2021. It's been a source of endless conspiracy among people from the far left to the far right for 4 years now. Turns out the dude was just living with his mother out in suburban Virginia. He's actually a black man, which is only relevant because CNN and Jake Tapper hilariously thought that he was a white man, actually. Go ahead and watch this.
Ryan Cole Jr., a 30-year-old white man from the D.C. suburbs, is charged with transporting an explosive device in interstate commerce and with malicious destruction.
Okay, so that's not a white man. News to CNN, that's not a white man. It kind of gets to this broader idea of trying to kind of shoebox and cram your particular story into your overarching ideological agenda. Anyway, the big question is this. The big question is, what in the world happened when it came to the 4 years? What happened during the 4 years of the Biden DOJ? Pam Bondi, the current Attorney General, is saying this. The FBI, along with U.S. Attorney Pirro, that's Jeanine Pirro, and all of our prosecutors have worked tirelessly for months, sifting through evidence that have been sitting at the FBI with the Biden administration for 4 long years. Let me be clear, there was no new tip, there was no new witness, just good, diligent police work and prosecutorial work. So what happened? Like literally what happened when it comes to Merrick Garland, when it comes to Christopher Wray? How did this possibly languish for 4 years now? That to me is definitely something that that ought to be investigated. It ought to be looked at very, very seriously. The current suspect here, Brian Cole Jr. is his name, again, a 30-year-old man from suburban Virginia. He's been charged with use of an explosive device, but Pam Bondi is saying that there easily could be more charges to come. We will keep close tabs on this particular story. For now, very good work from Attorney General Bondi and from FBI Director Kash Patel and everyone else involved in this story as well. So in other news, we are still unpacking the results and the ramifications of the Tennessee 7th Congressional District special election, which took place this past Tuesday night, what it potentially means for 2026, and frankly, what it potentially could actually mean for 2028, which is actually a topic that we have not spent a whole lot of time on recently on our show, that being 2028 itself. It's way too early, to be honest with you. We literally have not completed the first year of the Trump presidency, but because commentators love to play the parlor game, and folks in the audience oftentimes love to play the parlor game as well, I think it's not too early, at least for those reasons, to kind of get not just into the 2026 conversation, but also into the 2028 conversation as well. So to briefly recap, Matt Van Epps won his special election seat. So this is a special election in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District because the former Congressman, Dr. Mark Green, who was a physician, part of the House Physicians Caucus and all that, he left essentially to take a job in the private sector, which is his right. And they had a special election, and it's very odd timing for a special election. It's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. This kind of is a slower time of the year for many folks when it comes to politics more generally. This period between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the most wonderful time of the year, as we oftentimes refer to it, because it frankly kind of is. This time of the year absolutely rocks. You know, on a personal side, this is very much, me and my wife is like our time of the year. My wife and I got engaged in December 2022. We got married in December 2023, and we had our first child in December 2024. So December has very much been our month for the past few years, and this time of the year really just absolutely rocks. And one of the reasons that it rocks is because politics tends to fade into the background as we tend to focus more and more on the things that really matter and that deliver true sources of meaning in our lives, namely family, community, faith, religion, God, nation, and all that there. But having said that, that's a very important but. You really ought to focus on those things, less so what I'm about to discuss. But with that very important but, this show is primarily focused, not exclusively, but primarily focused on politics there. And politics does go on. So there was the special election in Tennessee, even during this month-ish long, most wonderful time of the year part of the calendar. And in this special election, you had Matt Van Epps, who was the heavily favored Republican candidate. He did indeed go ahead and prevail over his very, very, very far left challenger, this lunatic cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs leftist named Afton Bain, who was dubbed the so-called AOC of Tennessee because of her outrageous far left stances. She was a full defund the police kind of gal. She was all in for the keffiyeh-clad Hamas crazies and all that stuff there. She even had the chutzpah to start bashing her own hometown, Nashville, Tennessee, a part of which is in the 7th Congressional District. I mean, what kind of boneheaded moron? I mean, literally, what kind of absolute, frankly, just deeply disrespectful moron do you have to be to bash your own hometown, to bash some of your own putative would-be constituents in the name of what? Of trying to morally and score points? She said that she was upset with the way that Nashville became the bachelorette capital of the world. That actually might be a good thing when it comes to commerce, when it comes to tourism, when it comes to hotels and bars and restaurants there. But no, apparently for Afton Bain it was not. She was actually saying that she hates country music. What a very weird thing to say when you're trying to represent, I don't know, the home of country music. Country music absolutely rocks, by the way. So let's very much hold that against Afton Bain as well. It's basically all I listen to these days, to be honest with you. So Matt Van Epps in this district is a district that Donald Trump won in the 2024 presidential election by 22 points. It is a very, very R-heavy district. The Cook PVI is at least R plus 10, potentially more than that. Again, Trump won it by 22. There were some polls that show this potentially as a very, very tight race. Some had it within the margin of error there. That's not what happened. Matt Van Epps ends up prevailing here by roughly 8 to 9 points, give or take, depending on the absolute final tally as to how this comes in. Now, is Matt Van Epps going to be the next great Republican congressman there? I mean, I have no idea, to be honest with you. I don't want to get your hopes up or anything like that there. But Matt Van Epps' own politics are not really the point of this conversation. The point of the conversation is this, is when it comes to looking ahead to 2026, what do we make of all this? What do we make of the fact that the margin of victory for the Republican candidate has shrunk by 13 plus points, give or take, from the 2024 presidential election, and that would be Trump's margin of victory over Harris, to now this 8 to 9 point margin of victory for Van Epps over Bain. We have that data point, and we have various data points from the off-year elections that took place in early November, just about a month ago, namely the elections in New Jersey, where Republicans got smashed in the gubernatorial election, where Republicans got smashed in the Virginia gubernatorial election, and tragically, they also lost the Attorney General election in Virginia, where you had the The guy who literally called for his political opponents to be killed, Jay Jones, who astonishingly prevailed over his really quite excellent challenger, Jason Miyares, who's been doing a great job as Attorney General there in the Old Dominion. A terrible, terrible loss there. So you have that. You have Zoran Mamdani getting a 50% majority in New York City. He's going to be the next mayor of the nation's largest and most important city. God help all of us there. What do we make of all this there? Well, the very short answer is that it's nothing good. It is nothing particularly good for 2026. We're going to have a conversation on the show sooner rather than later with my old pal Harry Enton, one of the top polling and data gurus over at CNN. So we'll make sure to ask a lot of these questions to Harry when we bring him on the show as well. But part of me doesn't really have to ask Harry because I've actually seen what Harry's been saying on the airwaves, which is that right now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Donald Trump's approval rating at this particular juncture in his second term, because Trump pulled the Grover Cleveland. Okay, he's the first two-term non-consecutive president since Grover Cleveland 130-ish years ago. And he holding Cleveland aside, just in general, he has now one of the lowest approval ratings at this point in a second term in recent American history. And that's not good. I'm not going to lie to you and say that is good. I'm not going to lie to you and say that this president is viewed extraordinarily favorably by the American people right now, because he's not. There was a recent Gallup poll, and Gallup might be an outlier. In fact, I've had some conservative friends who tell me that Gallup does tend to poll a little more poorly for Trump than others. But Gallup currently has an approval rating for Trump, according to the most recent poll I saw, of right around 36% of the overall electorate, including an astonishingly low 25% of independents. That's really bad. And it means that people are not happy with what they are subjectively seeing and experiencing. And I insert the word subjectively there for a very deliberate reason, because it's not obvious to me that the Trump administration actually is doing poorly. In fact, if you look at the wins that they are racking up at the Supreme Court, when it comes to the briefs that the DOJ is filing, to the cases that they are arguing, they're actually doing quite well when it comes to the legal front. They're doing extremely well when it comes to the issue of border crossings. Amazingly, those catastrophic Biden-era border crossings. Do y'all remember that footage of Eagle Pass, Texas, and places like that there, of the migrant tents in the cities, and people just climbing the wall and walking through, trotting on in, catch and release, just like the Obama administration. It was back again during the Biden administration. All of that's gone. When is the last time you've seen any of that crap? That you've seen this illegal invasion from migrants being smuggled by the trafficking rings and the cartels? You haven't seen it because it's not happening. It's not happening. Border crossings are down 90+%. They're close to zero. It's been one of the unsung amazing successes of this administration. On the foreign stage, by the way, the administration is absolutely crushing it for the most part. Crushing it. I mean, all these various peace deals that they've been able to put together there, I mean, amazing stuff. Cambodia and Thailand, India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers, a peace deal. Armenia and Azerbaijan, are you freaking kidding me? I was there in person 2.5 years ago. I was on this trip that visited Armenia. We went to the border of the disputed territory, Nagorno-Karabakh, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That's a bitter conflict. Trump got a peace deal there. We saw what happened with Israel-Hamas recently in Gaza. It's not exactly a lasting peace deal, let's put it that way there, but they have tried really hard. We had the Israel-Iran ceasefire in June following the successful strike of 4 down the various other Iranian nuclear facilities there. The narco-terrorist strikes that we are robust supporters of here on the Josh Hammer Show. So they're killing it on the global stage. Marco Rubio is an exceptional Secretary of State. They're killing it when it comes to these ICE enforcement operations, when it comes to border crossings. They're killing it when it comes to their legal success at the United States Supreme Court, when it comes to their settlements with higher education, with Columbia, Harvard, Princeton, Cornell, all these Ivy League schools and so forth there, Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, most recently there, had a settlement there. They're killing it with all that. But unfortunately, it doesn't really matter if the American people aren't happy. Now, it does matter when it comes to substance, but I'm saying it doesn't really matter when it comes to politics. You can be amazingly successful, but unless the American people feel that, and they're happy with how it's going, your party is still in for a bruising the next time it's going to be on the ballot. And that would indeed historically mesh with the way that it's been pretty much always the party in the White House pretty much always loses seats in Congress during its first midterm election. The House goes from White House party control to opposition party control very, very, very often. There was, like, if memory serves, I think there's one instance where the White House party gained seats in the first midterm election in the past, like, 30, 40 years. And that would have been 2002, back at the height of the post-9/11 George Bush Republican Party approval rating. I mean, that's, to put it mildly, that approval rating did not last into Bush's second term, but back in 2002, around the time of the midterms, it was still very high. So unless things change, unfortunately, Republicans are going to be in for a bruising when it comes to 2026, and really, that has to mean focusing on the economy. That is all it is about. It is about the economy. The foreign stuff is great. The border crossing stuff is great. The legal success is great. It's all great. I'm a culture warrior. I love the culture war stuff. I love fighting the transgenderism stuff. I love fighting the higher education, totalitarians. I love all of it. But again, unless the American people are happy with what they see, none of it really matters. That is why, maybe above all, kind of then focusing a little bit just briefly on the 2028 conversation. That is why I'm skeptical when I look at the betting markets right now. So, for instance, I'm looking at Polymarket, maybe the most well-known of the online political betting markets. That above all is why I am skeptical right now when I see that the current Vice President, J.D. Vance, is such an overwhelming favorite right now, just on the pure betting markets. So right now, they have him as a 54% chance of becoming the Republican presidential nominee. That is Polymarket when it comes to 2028. The next closest is Marco Rubio, the current Secretary of State, at 8%. So JD has a higher chance, according to Polymarket, than literally every other candidate combined. Here's the main problem for J.D. Vance. The main problem for J.D. Vance is that the American people are currently saying that this second Trump administration is not going well. Now, you can dispute that. I can dispute that. In fact, I actually largely just did dispute that. I think the administration is actually doing a great job for the most part. But apparently, most Americans don't agree because they are stubbornly still feeling the aftershocks of binary inflation, affordability, cost of living there. We can debate why it is Americans feel that way, but that's just the reality. That is just the reality, is they are not happy with what they're seeing. So the logic that I'm putting forward is essentially this. If the American people really truly feel that the administration is not doing well, then why would they necessarily rush to nominate for either the nominee or the president, the current vice president? I mean, I'm the guy who was right there implementing these policies alongside the president. This kind of brings to mind the whole Kamala Harris debate in 2024. One of the reasons that some in the Democratic Party were hesitant to depose, to topple Joe Biden for Kamala Harris, is that you weren't exactly going to bring in an outside force, were you? No, you were all along, you were just going to bring on the Robin to the Batman, the wing woman, essentially. Someone who was there all along, defending and implementing all of Joe Biden's policies. In fact, there was that infamous interview that Kamala Harris gave, I think it might have been on The View, I can't quite recall, in the final weeks leading up to the election, where they said, Madam Vice President, do you have any policies that your administration has implemented that you regret? And shockingly to the whole country, she said no. There was not a single policy that she was actually willing to go forth and to put any distance between herself and her boss, Joe Biden. And that, frankly, is one of the things that cost her the election. So I hate to say it, but that is definitely something that could happen here when it comes to J.D. Vance, when it comes to 2028. If I were betting in the betting markets, and I'm not, and by the way, kind of hilarious, after Marco Rubio currently in the betting markets, Donald Trump himself is actually 30, even though he's constitutionally term limited. You know, you can always have a constitutional amendment that's passed, okay? But for what it's worth, right now, the 22nd Amendment does limit you to 2 terms. That was a post-FDR constitutional amendment after FDR was elected 4 separate times. If I were engaged in the betting market right now, it seems to me that Marco Rubio is getting somewhat short shrift. Marco Rubio is absolutely crushing it when it comes to Secretary of State of the United States. He was really born for this role. He cares perhaps above all about America's role on the world stage, about diplomacy. This has really kind of been one of his go-to issues ever since his earliest political career here in the South Florida area, from the Miami City Council to the legislature up in Tallahassee to U.S. Senator and now here. He cares a lot about these issues. I think Rubio is absolutely crushing it. I have no idea if Rubio is actually going to if he's actually going to change, he's actually going to challenge J.D. Vance when it comes to this forthcoming election. They seem to be very, very chummy, deeply personally friendly, those two. So I don't know if Rubio would do it. Politics is politics. I think there's a real chance that he would. For what it's worth, a lot of other folks are much further down as well. Ron DeSantis at 3%, Tucker Carlson at 3%, Donald Trump Jr. 2%, Ted Cruz 2%, and on it goes. So as now, it really does look like Rubio is the main guy who could potentially challenge JD in 2028. Again, I think that 8% for Marco Rubio is way, way too low on the betting markets right now for the very simple reason that I think JD Vance is potentially, unless things change, which they could, he's looking at having a potential Kamala Harris problem when it comes to having to explain and justify all the policies of an administration that you may like, I may like, in fact, I do like, but for whatever reason, American people, it's just not landing. It's just not resonating with them. The Democrat side of the aisle, totally wide open, total mess. Currently on Polymarket, Gavin Newsom, 36%. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 12%. Mark Kelly, 4%. Pete Buttigieg, 5%. And on it goes down the utter clown roster of candidates there. We will see what sort of nefarious actor makes it out there on the Democratic side. But whoever it is, folks, it is not going to be good. And now it's time for our end-of-week Hammer Time segment. So this is where we run through your woke DEI headlines of the week and give you our quick rapid-fire analysis. We begin with Melinda Gates. We're talking on Thursday's show about Bill Gates. Now we're talking about Melinda Gates. So Melinda Gates says that businesses that are ending DEI programs are, quote, affecting families. So Melinda French Gates is saying that it could hurt families if businesses allow DEI programs to go away, to lapse. So she's no longer married to Bill Gates, for what it's worth. She is the former wife, but she is a mega donor in her own right. And speaking to Katie Drummond of Wired, here's what she said. She said, quote, "What I do know to be true is that they are affecting families. They are affecting people's opportunity to get the education they want. They are affecting people's ability to get the job that they want to get." Oh, yeah, I actually agree with you. DEI is affecting people's ability to get the university admission or the job that you want to get. How do I know? Because it's discriminating against white people. It's discriminating against Asians, against Jews, against Mormons, against Christians. That's who it's discriminating against. Okay? So is DEI, if we fade away DEI, will some people be affected? Sure. But the people that will be affected are the people who are being artificially boosted in the first place in the name of so-called diversity. The folks who didn't necessarily belong there or deserve that on the underlying merits of the admission slot in the case of higher education or in the case of the job, in the case of the corporate bureaucracy more generally. So, I mean, bizarrely, Melinda Gates is kind of right here when she says that getting rid of DEI programs is affecting people's opportunities, it's affecting people's families there, but she's not right in the way that she means. More generally speaking, it seems like Melinda Gates is just totally not getting the picture when it comes to the moral imperative to get rid of DEI in this country, which is interesting because her former husband, Bill Gates, in case you missed Thursday's show, Bill Gates has actually done something of a rather curious 180-degree turn when it comes to the issue of climate change, which he was an apocalyptic evangelist on for God knows how long. So, frankly, Melinda, you might want to hit up your ex-hubby because he actually has, far be from me to say, but he actually might have a modicum of sanity that these days, Melinda, you seem to be lacking. Going down now to Dallas, Texas. Dallas officials are explaining changes to comply with their federal directives banning DEI. So amid budgetary constraints and various other federal initiatives to end DEI programs, officials in the city of Dallas, in the municipal office, my former home actually, Dallas, Texas, our wonderful radio affiliate there, 660 AM The Answer, Dallas-Fort Worth. So amid these budgetary constraints and federal directives to end the DEI programs, Dallas, Texas officials have developed a plan to help them decide when to take the lead in addressing residents' needs and when not to. Now, the orders don't explicitly ask cities to discontinue equity programs, but city officials said that they were preempting potential disruptions and were using the Trump executive order to improve data collection. So here's a quote from the Deputy Director of Housing and Community Empowerment from the city of Dallas. Quote, "Even as Dallas grows, many households are continuing to struggle. We know that nearly 1 in 5 children in our community live in a household that struggles to meet basic needs. Additionally, we're lagging behind state and national averages when it comes to important things like home ownership rates." So for what it's worth, the current mayor of Dallas, Texas, is someone who recently flipped parties from Democrat to Republican. He's been working really hard actually to establish not just Fort Worth, which is the more traditionally Texan, more traditionally Western, more traditionally conservative, red-blooded, good old-fashioned American city there in North Texas. But Mayor Johnson's really been trying to get Dallas itself, actually, to be kind of this real capital for team civilizational sanity to move in there. And I applaud those efforts. I very much do, especially as a former Dallas resident myself. The key insight here is that you have to get rid of DEI, okay? Normal people don't want this crap. Normal people don't want this anywhere near their city. They don't want it anywhere near their corporations, anywhere near the stores where they shop or what they or anything. Just get it out. It is illegal, it's discriminatory, it's morally repulsive, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with the American experiment. Finally, comes to AT&T. AT&T is scrapping its DEI programs, becoming just the latest company to end the policies as the Trump administration continues pushing for nationwide elimination of these practices. So here's this: we're ending on a positive note here this week on the Josh Hammer Show. So AT&T wrote a letter to FCC Commissioner Brandon Carr, who's the chairman of the FCC. They wrote a letter just this past Monday saying that they were ending all DEI-related policies following recent shifts in the legal landscape, a.k.a. the Trump administration trying to get rid of it, as they should. Here is David McAtee, the senior executive vice president and the general counsel at AT&T. Quote, AT&T has always stood for merit-based opportunity, and we are pleased to reaffirm our commitment to equal employment opportunity and non-discrimination today. Consistent with applicable law, our multi-pronged approach allows employees to thrive in an environment free from invidious discrimination. Okay, I don't really care what kind of jargon you use in there. You got rid of DEI, good. Personally, as someone who's been using AT&T Mobile for like 15 years or whatever the heck it's been there, I am happy. AT&T, by the way, a corporation headquartered in Dallas, Texas, in a red state there, they should be reflecting the values of their customers, and that is something that apparently AT&T is doing, and they deserve credit for that. Hope you have a great weekend, folks, and make sure to subscribe to The Josh Hammer Show, wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube or Apple, wherever you get that podcast. Hope you have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you on Monday.